This is the Speaking of Writers podcast. I'm Steve Richards. We dive deep into the lives on this podcast and works of today's most fascinating authors. And today we're talking football history, legacy, and one of the greatest debates in all of sports. My guest is longtime NFL insider and New York Times bestselling author Gary Myers. Gary has covered the NFL for over 40 years and written 6 books, including Brady versus Manning and Once a Giant. His brand new book, Brady versus Belichick, the Dynasty Debate, is out now from St. Martin's Press, and it takes the deepest dive yet into the relationship between Bill Belichick and Tom Brady, the two towering figures behind the New England Patriots dynasty. Through fresh interviews of players, coaches, executives, and the legends themselves, Gary explores the question that has fueled sports bars and talk shows for decades. Who was more responsible for the greatest dynasty in NFL history? Coach Belichick or Tom Brady? Gary Myers joins me now here on the Speaking of Writers podcast. Welcome.
How you doing, Steve? Thanks for
Well,
having me on.
good. It's great to have you here. You've written about the great rivalries. I mentioned Brady versus Manning. What inspired you to tackle Brady versus Belichick in this debate?
Well, kind of what you said in the intro, that this is, just a fascinating relationship involving the greatest dynasty in NFL history with probably the greatest coach ever and the greatest quarterback for sure of all time, and 9 Super Bowl appearances, 6 championships over a 20-year period. And I think the debate over who deserves, they both deserve credit, obviously. They needed each other, but because we are who we are. We like to have a definitive winner, and that's what this book tries to present. I got into it with a deep dive with a lot of people who were directly involved in this, either as teammates or fellow coaches with Belichick, and coaches and players who went against the Patriots, and tried to present a pretty strong argument when I made my final case.
As I mentioned in the introduction, too, you've covered the NFL for decades. How did your access to players, coaches, and executives shape the depth of this book?
Well, yeah, I mean, I couldn't have done it without them. And the fact that I was, even though I worked in New York, I covered a lot of Patriot games. And because not only the rivalry with the Jets and the 2 Super Bowls against the Giants, but because the Patriots always seemed to be in the Super Bowl and making a long run in the playoffs, I was up in Foxborough a lot during the week and covering their games, that I got to know a lot of the players. And so when it came time to write this book, I had what I call, really good institutional knowledge of the subject. Um, it was still educational for me to talk to all these players and coaches and get behind the scenes stories that I wasn't aware of, but also was very helpful to had been exposed to it over that entire 20-year period to have a pretty good understanding of what I was getting into before I even made my first phone call.
I'm sure there were a lot of surprises, but maybe you can give me a couple. What surprised you the most in your interviews with Belichick and Brady's circle about how they viewed each other?
Well, I think that the loyalty to Tom in the locker room is something that really wasn't understood um, during the course of his career. The arc of his career where he went from a sixth-round draft pick to the greatest quarterback of all time. People who not no some people spanned some players span like a 10-year period with them. Clearly, nobody was with him the entire time. Nobody played 20 years with Brady. But in talking to players from, say, both dynasties, because say it was a two distinct 10-year dynasties, and talking to players from each of those, I just didn't get the sense that Tom ever changed. That he was always this guy who showed deep interest in his teammates, that always tried to be one of the guys, no matter how much he accomplished. That never changed. That he wasn't standoffish at all. One player even pointed out, all the stars in the team, the quarterbacks on teams have 2 lockers in the corner. Tom just had a single locker in the middle of the locker room.
Mm.
And players take notice of those kinds of things. And I think they played hard for him because they all really liked him. I couldn't find anybody who didn't like him. Not quite the same with Belichick, but that's understood because he was the coach and he
Yeah.
drove him really hard. But they all respected him, and the reason they put up with a lot of his nonsense was because they knew he had to win. They knew that he knew how to win, and that's ultimately what is all they were interested in.
At its core, Gary, how would you describe the Brady Belichick relationship? Mentor and protege, equals, or something else entirely?
Definitely not equals. That's never how Belichick looked at it. I think early on it was, for sure, mentor and student. The the area that gets overlooked is that in Tom's second year in 2001, which was the year that Bledsoe got hurt,
Right.
right at the beginning of training camp that year, Dick Rabine, the quarterback coach, who was the one responsible for Belichick drafting Brady, he was the guy that fell in love with Brady during the draft process and was pushing for Belichick to take him as early as the third and fourth round. He wound up taking him in the sixth round. Unfortunately and tragically, Dick Rabine passed away right at the beginning of training camp in '01. So Brady lost the coach that he was closest to. Belichick did not hire another quarterback coach that season. He did the job himself. So he was very involved along with offensive coordinator Charlie Weiss. But Belichick met with Brady every Tuesday night during the season to go over game plans. And he gave it to him from the perspective of, okay, I'm a defensive coordinator. This is how I play this, this is how I play that. And it was a different perspective than he was getting from Charlie Weiss. He was getting it strictly from a defensive coach's point of view, which was incredibly helpful in his preparation. So they did develop a close relationship. At the same time, as Brady began to achieve more, Belichick found him very willing to be coached hard. But along with that, he would pick on him a lot in the team meetings and in the practice field. Tom could throw four touchdowns in a 35-10 win, but he'd throw one interception, and Belichick would open the team meeting the next day with Brady. What was this interception? What were you thinking here? This could have cost us the game. Instead of saying game ball goes to Tom Brady who threw four touchdown passes. And the thing is that never changed. He always treated Tom like that, and Tom grew tired of it at the end, which had a lot to do with the friction that developed the last 5 years or so, and ultimately their separation. So it was Belichick never. Now he had a lot of respect for Tom and his accomplishments, but he never treated him as an equal. I don't think Tom expected to be treated as an equal. I just think he expected to be treated with more respect outwardly. Belichick might have been respectful to him with things he would say publicly, but in team meetings and in practice, Tom never got that from him.
I want to go back to Drew Bledsoe for a moment. The chapter on Mo Lewis and Drew Bledsoe is fascinating. Did Lewis open up more than you expected about being blamed for starting the dynasty?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, it took some doing to get him on the phone, and when I got his number, I had to only try it like 10 or 12 times before he'd pick up. He wasn't returning any of my messages, and I knew exactly what I wanted to try to get with him somehow, and he was crucial to this book because it was something that just hadn't been out there. And you always try to find new stuff in talking about a subject that has been written about a lot. And getting Mo Lewis to put all the blame on Bledsoe for that hit. And I think he's right. I mean, that was a clean hit. It was vicious, but it was clean.
Yeah.
And Bledsoe, instead of turning it up at the end to the inside of the field, should have run out of bounds. It's just a self-preservation mode. You always hear about players talking about making business decisions on the field, going down and running out of bounds. Bledsoe did the exact opposite, and it cost him eventually, cost him his career in New England. But Lewis is still very bitter all these years later. He was a very good player. He's one of the two or three best linebackers the Jets have ever had, and always
Yeah.
remembered for in fans' minds is you're the one who started the Tom Brady era, and it's really not fair.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree with you on that. Lifelong Jets fan. He definitely Mo Lewis, one of the top three on that franchise. The Spygate and Deflategate scandals appear in the book, of course. How did they affect the Brady Belichick dynamic and the team's legacy too?
Well, I think the Spygate one, and I've asked Brady this so many times over the years. He claims he didn't get any information that ever helped him even on one play. Uh, my feeling is that Belichick wouldn't have invested all that time and manpower in having, his associates and people who work for him have that camera on the defensive signals for all those years. It just didn't happen the game that got caught. It was going on for years. And then it took a lot to decode it and match it up with the plays. He wouldn't have done that unless he was getting something out of it.
Yeah.
But Tom never really got dragged into it. I don't think anybody was really questioning his accomplishments, saying, oh, it wouldn't have happened without Spygate. But I've had other people say, if Belichick was learning one or two things that helped him on one or two plays in a game, that could be the difference between winning and losing, getting to a Super Bowl, winning a Super Bowl. So you get varying schools of thought. Other coaches have told me they've tried to do it, didn't get anything out of it. It was meaningless. But I think in the second paragraph of when Belichick finally retires, the word Spygate will be in there because that's really part of his legacy. Fair or not fair, because he went on to win three more Super Bowls after that. I think that's attached to him. Deflategate, I thought was a bunch of nonsense. And Belichick was very quick to divorce himself from that and kept saying, ask the quarterback, ask Tom. I don't know anything about it. All the years I've been a coach, I never worried about how a ball was inflated. I think that he kind of hung Brady out to dry a little bit on that, but maybe it's because of what he went through on Spygate. He said,
Mhm.
I don't want any part of this. Let him handle it himself. So I don't think that's, I will say this. When I was writing for the Daily News then, I was one of the few, if not the only one writing about this, who said it was a bunch of nonsense from the beginning. And that's maybe because I had too much faith in Brady that I just couldn't imagine he was cheating so blatantly. And I think in the last 10 years, people have come around now to say, it was a witch hunt by the NFL. They were trying to make up, it was a make-up call because they didn't punish Belichick, because owners were upset that Goodell didn't punish Belichick enough for Spygate, and this was their way of getting back at the Patriots. Uh, Goodell was doing that for the owners. It was a connected dots investigation that cost the league $5 million, and I don't think we learned any more from that investigation than we would have known otherwise.
Gary, the great Joe Montana told you he'd split the credit 60-40 in Brady's favor. How much did Brady's success in Tampa versus Belichick's struggles in New England post 2020 factor into your conclusion here?
So I love that question, Steve, because I haven't had many people agree with me on this. I think it's completely irrelevant.
Hmm.
The argument is who gets the credit for what they accomplished together, not who accomplished the most when they were separated. Now, I did think did reinforce the idea that Belichick couldn't win without Brady because he couldn't win without Brady in Cleveland. He couldn't win without Brady in New England after Brady left. And Tom went and won a Super Bowl without Belichick. So certainly it adds to the argument that, Brady was very, very responsible for what happened in New England. I understand that argument, but it doesn't address what happened in New England. And that to me is what I try to dissect. And listen, I still give it to Brady, but after what happened when they separated, people want to give it to Brady 85%, which is ludicrous. And I give a little more to Brady than Montana did, but it's not like one-sided like some think it is. And I think it is a poor reflection on Belichick of what happened when they separated and Tom had immediate success and Bill wound up getting fired after 4 years. But it doesn't have anything to do with how instrumental Belichick was in Tom's development. First by drafting him, then keeping him as a fourth string quarterback, then keeping him as the starter when Bledsoe was healthy, helping him develop, the first few years when Tom needed to be developed. That was a lot of Belichick. And to overlook that because of what happened in 2020 when they were separated, I just dismissed that as part of the argument.
Looking ahead, crystal ball time here. How do you think history will ultimately judge Brady and Belichick individually?
Um, as the greatest coach and the greatest quarterback in NFL history, there'll be more argument perhaps on Belichick than there will on Brady, who, see, I think Brady and Montana are interchangeable. I really do. If Joe hadn't gotten hurt towards the end of his stay in San Francisco, he might have won three more Super Bowls with the 49ers. I mean, he was still that good towards
Yeah.
the end, but he just got hurt, and then Steve Young took over, and Joe went to Kansas City. Um, but it's hard to argue against Brady because nine Super Bowls, six championships versus Joe, four Super Bowls, four championships, never threw an interception in the Super Bowl. To me, they're really the same player. Tom was just a little like the modern day version of Montana. I think either one of them could have played in either era and done just as well as they did. Belichick, because of what happened in his 4 years after Tom left, and the early struggles that he's having in North Carolina, although I do think he'll get the thing turned around next year, it certainly has impacted Belichick's legacy as the greatest coach of all time. I still think that he is, but if he goes 2-10 this year, after finishing 4-13 in New England and um, all the losing seasons he had in New England without Belichick, how can that not affect his legacy? It doesn't, again, it does, to me, it doesn't affect the Brady Belichick argument of their 20 years together, but his legacy involves more than the 20 years.
Do you think we'll ever see a dynasty like the Patriots again, or was this truly a once in a lifetime run?
Well, what's interesting to me, Steve, is that Brady's third championship was in '04, Brady Belichick '04. Their fourth championship was in 2014. In between, they lost two Super Bowls and three AFC championship games. And by the time they got to 2014, clearly it was a completely different team than the one that won 10 years earlier. They kind of reinvented themselves and had a second dynasty. And the reason I'm bringing that up is how do we look at the Kansas City Chiefs? They've won three in like, I think 5 years, is it? Or
Three and five, I
18,
think. Yep.
uh, 3-5 or three. Yeah. Yeah, the first one I believe was in 2019 season, and their most recent was the 2023 season. Yeah, so 3 and 5 years. All right. So they get blown out in the Super Bowl by Philadelphia in this most recent one. Now it looks like they're taking a dip. Okay. And in my mind, no one, they're not going to, Andy Reid and Mahomes will not win six championships. I just don't see it. But there was a 10-year gap between the Patriots' third and fourth. Who's not to say that Andy Reid rebuilds and reinvents the Chiefs team in the next 2, 3 years? Mahomes, I don't even know if he's 30 years old yet or right around it. He's got a lot of years to go as long as he stays healthy. So they can have a second run at this. Um, they're the closest I think anybody's going to come. It's just so hard now with the roster turnovers and the draft being a great equalizer in free agency. But Kansas City has three in the bank already, and if they're able to double that over the next 10 years or whatever, then we'll look at them as saying they equaled with Brady and Belichick. That I don't think it's going to happen, but you certainly can't discount it.
I know it's early in the season here. Is this Buffalo season finally, you think?
Well, I went into this year, and it's only we're not even a month old, thinking it was either Baltimore or Buffalo. Um, Buffalo took the first step by beating Baltimore with that tremendous comeback in the
Yeah.
opener. I really thought that Baltimore was going to bounce back, and after they won their second game, was get to beat Detroit, which they didn't. And Detroit's one of the better teams in the league, but those are the games that Baltimore needs to win to establish itself, and they lost at home. And now they go to Kansas City this week. I would say right now that Buffalo, to me, is the best team in the league. I would say before last week in the NFC, it was Green Bay, but then they lose in Cleveland. So who knows? It's just crazy. It's a
Yeah.
week-to-week league. We make new judgments based on what happened the previous Sunday. Um, if some of the best teams lose this week, then we reevaluate who are the best teams going into next week. It makes it fun, but it's crazy. more so now than ever before. We try to make long-term judgments based on short-term results, and more often than not, you get burned by that. So, go ahead and call Buffalo the Super Bowl favorite right now after 3 weeks, and then get back to me, when they lose a couple of games. We'll see what they how we reevaluate at that point.
All right, Gary, we're going to wrap up with a little lightning round for you here. Some quick, fun
Sure.
questions. Tom or Bill, who would you rather have dinner with?
Oh, definitely Tom. He's got a lot more personality. I think he's funny. Bill would be fascinating, but Tom, definitely.
It seems and you've been with him, of course, I haven't, but from afar, Bill, if you loosen him up and get him going on a subject, he will be fascinating. Like specialty, he loves to talk special teams.
Yeah, yeah.
Something the,
I didn't have a good relationship with him for a lot of years
yeah.
because I was very critical of him in the Spygate stuff. And then I went up sitting next to him at a Hall of Fame meeting in 2020 in Canton. It was a special centennial committee. So they involved some coaches and general managers and put them on the committee. I'm a regular Hall of Fame voter. So I sat next to him for 8 hours,
Mm,
and I kind of broke the ice when he sat down, thinking, "Oh, this could be a long day, if we don't talk to each other the whole day." I had a great time with him, and we've stayed in touch ever since, and he's very helpful to me on my last two books. So there is another side to him. I still rather have dinner with Tom.
yeah. Best game you ever covered in person?
January 10th, 1982, the catch game. Um, you can see
Right
it.
behind you there. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
that was my first book. I had been working at the Dallas Morning News for about a month covering the Cowboys. They hired me towards the end of the season. I was supposed to be the backup writer for the last month and then take over. When I got there, they say, "You're it. You're the beat guy." And a month later, I'm covering this game that to me still is the greatest game I've ever covered. And probably the only game where I was writing this game story that I felt nervous writing it because I worried that my words couldn't match up to what I just saw. And because I was new at that job, I really tried hard in that one. Certainly the David Tyree catch
Yeah.
was an amazing game. Scott Norwood missing the field goal was an amazing Super Bowl. The Patriots, Seattle Patriots Falcons with that huge comeback. Those were all great games. I mean, I've been fortunate. I covered, I think it was 36 Super Bowls in a row, something like that. And I saw some really memorable games along the way, covering the league for as long as I did.
Most memorable interview subject from your career?
Wow. Um, I once did an interview with, are you talking like, I'm going to narrow it down for you and pick out a specific interview
Yeah.
rather than just a subject. I'll give you a couple. I sat in Lawrence Taylor's kitchen about a month before the Hall of Fame vote. In He got in 99. So this was like around Christmas time of 98. And there was a lot of controversy on whether he was going to get into the Hall of Fame. He had all those drug issues. He was still having drug issues. I met with him a couple of days after he got out of rehab. And I sat with him for like an hour and a half in his kitchen. He poured his heart out to me. And I turned that story around for the paper the next day. I mean, I had a lot of tape to transcribe, and I didn't get done with him until like 6 o'clock at night. And Lawrence, if you got him in the right mood, such a vulnerable personality, despite what a great player he was. Um, that was fascinating. Another one was for my Brady versus Manning book. I tried to set up the interview with Tom, and the PR guy for the Patriots said, "Here are your two choices. You can interview him in the meeting room, and he'll give you about 15 minutes because he's going to be in a hurry to get home to his family. Or you can drive with him from Foxborough," and he was living in downtown Boston at the time. And he'll drive. He's great doing interviews as he's driving because he does a lot of conference calls that way. And, if you hope for a little bit of Boston traffic, you'll probably get an hour with him. And then you just got to find your way back to your car, which was parked in the parking lot in Foxborough. And Tom was great. He was that I had just started out my interviews for that book, And when I got out of the car and got a cab going back the other way, I said, he just made my book
Yeah.
because I'll just fill it in now with everybody else. And went to see Peyton a few months later in Denver, and he gave me the 15 minutes that I would have gotten with Brady, but I got it with Manning. He was just not very cooperative with me. And so it was kind of, and certainly my perception of Peyton, and I had a lot of dealings with him up until that point, was that I wasn't going to be able to keep this to 2 hours because he loves to talk,
Yeah.
and he just wasn't into it for whatever reason, and just didn't really help me a lot.
Quite a difference from it and driving with those crazy drivers in Boston, with Tom Brady giving you an interview there.
Yeah, you know what? Unfortunately, Steve, we didn't hit any traffic. It's
Amazing.
amazing.
Yeah.
5 o'clock in Boston, and we zipped right into the city. But then Tom knew that I needed more time, so he just pulled over on the street, and we sat in the car and talked for like another 15, 20 minutes. The thing that I had known Tom somewhat over the years to that point, and this was like 2012, but it was clearly the most extended time I ever got to talk to him by myself. And what I always told people is that I asked a question, he looked in the eye, looked me in my eye as he answered it, like he wasn't looking around. I mean, we were in a car, so it wasn't like he was looking to see who else he can talk to, but he was really genuine in his answers. And when we were done, I turned off my tape recorder. He was asking me questions. How did I get the idea for the book? How long does it take me to write it? Who else am I going to talk to? And I think he was really sincere in wanting, he's a very inquisitive guy. And I thought he was really sincere in, he wasn't patronizing me at that point because he wanted to get home, but he sat and talked to me for another 10 minutes about the process of writing a book. Maybe because he plans on doing it himself one day. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be. Last one here, Gary. Favorite sports book you didn't write?
Wow. That is an easy one. And I am going to, if I gave you 20 guesses, you'd never guess this one. So I'm just going to tell you. It's right on my shelf over there. Ball Four by Jim Bouton.
Hmm.
I love that book. It has inspired me to one day do, I know it's kind of gotten cliched since then, but I'd love to do the Diary of a Season where I really have inside access. That book was so entertaining and so funny that I just loved it, because it was the first of its kind. Certainly I've read a lot of other books since then that were just, tremendous books. Seth Wickersham is one of my favorite sports authors. Ian O'Connor has written a lot of really, really good
Yeah,
books.
Ian's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I've tried to read all their books because, you learn a lot by reading other authors too. And those guys are just on another level. I'm trying to get there.
I had a
But
feeling it wasn't going to be an NFL book and another sport. I was thinking maybe horse racing or a book.
Well,
But
baseball is my favorite sport. I made a career out of covering football,
mm,
but I love baseball. It's just that football is the only sport you can cover for a newspaper where you can have somewhat of a normal life because of the travel every other weekend, basically.
right.
Baseball, you got to pack your suitcase for 10 days and you got to do it every 2 weeks. And basketball is a different city every night. What kind of life would that be? And I admire the guys that can do that. It's just I had no desire to do that.
I was just
Plus, I
talking to,
learned to love football. I mean, I always loved football as a
yeah.
fan growing up, but I learned to love writing about football because I thought during the week you got to be really creative because you only had the one game a week. And that's where I thought, I was able to separate myself from a lot of other football writers, as I always felt I had good ideas. I was good work in the locker room. I got players to trust me and tell me stuff they weren't telling anybody else. So I really like covering football.
I was just talking to a colleague earlier today. Quick thing on baseball. We're on the eve of the baseball postseason. This is going to be a great postseason, I think. You got some hot teams rolling in, Seattle and the great Cal Raleigh story. The Brewers. I mean, this is going to be fantastic, I think. Fantastic October.
Well, I just need my Mets to.
Uh, I see. I didn't bring them up. Lifelong Mets fan too, but
I since day one in 1962, I'm a Mets fan,
mm,
and truthfully, my love of the Mets is a contributing reason besides what I just mentioned before, why I never wanted to cover baseball. Because once you're covering it, you can't be a fan. I was a
right.
Giants fan growing up, But from the day one that I started covering football, I just didn't care who won. I rooted for to have a good story or a good column to write. You have to divorce yourself emotionally from the teams and rooting for them to win. I never covered a game. I can say that in all honesty. I never cared who won, other than during the playoffs, if a certain team winning made my travel plans easier, then I have to admit. But it wasn't because of any loyalty to the team. It was,
Right.
it made my life easier, like avoiding back-to-back trips to the West Coast from New York. I always rooted for that.
Yeah, I'm sure. He's Gary Myers. The new book out now is Brady versus Belichick, the Dynasty Debate. It is from St. Martin's Press, available wherever books are sold. Essential read for football fans, Patriot fans, and anyone who loves a great sports debate. Gary Myers, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me on, Steve. I enjoyed it.
And this is the Speaking of Writers podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Till next time, I'm Steve Richards. Thanks for watching.